Our own Chris Wallace, anchor of Fox News Sunday, will be there. And he has some big news for us. Chris Wallace, good morning. What is it?
Good morning to you, Sandra. Yes, we will be there for the summit on Monday, and immediately after the summit, I will have the first and only interview that the Russian President Vladimir Putin will give to a Western journalist. Obviously very interested in that. There's going to be a joint news conference after the summit, President Trump and President Putin answering a few reporters' questions, but then we're going to sit down for a half-hour interview. No holds barred, no subjects off limits. We'll obviously talk about the summit and what has been accomplished or not accomplished there, any potential breakthroughs, hot spots between the two leaders on NATO, on Syria, on Ukraine. Obviously, we'll get into the allegations of Russian meddling in the 2016 election and ask him about potential meddling in the 2018 election. And then I want to delve into Vladimir Putin and what he wants for his country. But an exclusive interview with Vladimir Putin on Fox News on Monday.
We look forward to that, Chris. Meanwhile, we've got live pictures still up of Marine One landing there, and a security detail and communications team of the Trump administration getting off there. We expect to see live pictures of the president and the first lady shortly as he is on his way to meet with Theresa May. So we will look forward to your interview with Vladimir Putin, Chris. And, of course, everyone on the left and the right has their take over, A, whether or not the president should even be meeting one-on-one with Vladimir Putin, and, two, what should be discussed?
Well, I don't know that many people think he shouldn't be meeting with Vladimir Putin, but what should be discussed is obviously a very hot point. And one of the concerns that a lot of the people that President Trump just left in Brussels, the European allies, is will the president make any concessions, as he did, for instance, to Kim Jong-un when he unilaterally announced that the U.S. would not participate in any more war games with South Korea that Kim said were provocative, and the president also said he believed were provocative. One of the concerns is that Europe and NATO has girded itself against Russia and Putin after the invasion and seizure of Crimea, the interference in Ukraine. That's when a lot of sanctions were imposed on Russia, and the concern is that things have not changed. Russia is still in Crimea. It is still destabilizing Ukraine, and their concern is whether or not President Trump is going to make some concessions to Vladimir Putin when he meets with him, because the situation on the ground and that occasion those sanctions in the first place haven't changed. So it's very controversial, but of course we don't know what President Trump's attitude is going to be towards Putin, or Putin's attitude towards President Trump. President Trump makes the argument that he's been tougher than Barack Obama has been. He's giving lethal aid to Ukraine. He was the one who kicked, about 50, 60 Russian diplomats out of the U.S. after the nerve gas attack on former Russian spy Sergei Skripal in Britain. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that summit, and especially interesting to see what Vladimir Putin says to us immediately thereafter. Well,
we've surely been getting a lot of response to this upcoming meeting. And yesterday on this program, we had former Governor Bill Richardson, a Democrat, of course, former ambassador. And we asked him about this upcoming summit. And here's what he had to say on whether or not the meeting should take place and under what conditions. Listen.
I'm for meeting adversaries, but I don't want the president to have a love feast with Putin. I want him to get something done to protect America's interests.
But someone who does not think that this meeting should be happening was Chuck Schumer, leading Democrat, says that they should not meet one-on-one. He went on a Twitter fest yesterday, issued a joint statement with Nancy Pelosi, and said this: President Trump's brazen insults and denigration of one of America's most steadfast allies, Germany, is an embarrassment. The president needs to remember that. As commander-in-chief, his duty is to protect the American people from foreign threats, not to sell out our democracy to Putin. Chris.
Well, what a surprise that Chuck Schumer would be critical of whatever President Trump did. Look, obviously, if he's selling out America's democracy, that wouldn't be a good thing. There's no indication he's going to do that. As I've said, if you look at the facts on the ground, one of the interesting things about President Trump and all of this is there's been such a difference between his words and his deeds. There is no question that some of the things that he has said would give cause for concern when it comes to Putin, when he talked about inviting them back into the G7. Again, the reason they were kicked out was because of the seizure of Crimea. When he talks in other positive ways about Putin, when he says that NATO is as bad as NAFTA. But when you look at what he's actually done, not what he said, but what he's done, the U.S. is still contributing an enormous amount of money to NATO. The U.S. is giving lethal aid to Ukraine. The president says he's going to bring up the meddling that Russia engaged in in the U.S. election in 2016. So we'll have to wait and see. But, you know, the idea that he's going there to sell it out, I think it was Schumer, maybe it was somebody else who was outraged at the idea that two men were going to meet together just with translators. Well, that's what Russian and American presidents have done as far back as the 1950s. So the idea that, you know, that the president shouldn't be able to meet with his Russian counterpart is absurd.
Yeah, and by the way, some more live pictures coming in of the president and the first lady touching down there for their arrival. And ahead of this meeting with Theresa May, I want to get in what she has said about the upcoming summit with Putin. She said, "I welcome President Trump's forthcoming meeting with President Putin. Open channels of communication between the U.S. and Russia are key to managing the risks of confrontation." This is what she had planned to say. That's according to her spokesman. So, you know, and we've got the live pictures up next to you, Chris. This is a big week for this presidency.
Oh, absolutely. And look, in terms of the summit, and why this is one of the reasons I'm so fascinating about sitting down with Vladimir Putin right after the summit, there is so much for these two men to discuss. Putin has called NATO a threat. The president obviously has had his criticism, although he praised it today as he was leaving. Obviously, we're going to want to talk about that. They still have Ukraine. They still have huge differences on Syria. The New START arms control treaty runs out in 2021. Are they going to be able to extend that? Putin just in March said that they had developed, the Russians had, a new invincible missile that could defeat all of our anti-missile systems, plus election meddling. I mean, I would think that's a fairly full plate for a few hours on Monday afternoon in Helsinki.
Fair to say that. Chris Wallace, we look forward to your big half-hour interview, sit-down interview with Vladimir Putin coming up this Monday, Helsinki. We look forward to the summit, the interview with Putin. Chris, we'll be watching all of it. Thank you.